Hey everyone, it's Jennifer and thanks for stopping by. Lately I've been addicted to using embossing paste with stencils and I wanted to see if I could use the paste for something else. So today I decided to try coloring with embossing paste and it worked out well, so I thought I'd share it with you. I thought this embossing paste coloring was perfect for this ice cream cone image that I got, and also I'm going to show you in this video how you can take a greeting and completely change it all around and get something new. So I'll show you that at the end of the video. Now this card was created with the stamp set from the current Simon Says Stamp card kit. I just used the stamp from this kit, but there are many great things in the kit and I encourage you to check it out. I have a piece of watercolor paper here because when I started this I wasn't sure. I thought I was going to do a lot of watercolor on it, but I ended up not. But I really like the texture of the watercolor paper anyways. Now I wanted to kind of center an area in the middle of my card to do all my work in. I wasn't sure if I was going to kind of ink this rectangle or not, but it helps me kind of center in the center of the card. So I can keep all of my stamping right in the center. So I put masking tape or painter's tape all around the edges. Now I have the ice cream cone image from the stamp set, and I want to actually have 3 scoops of ice cream on it. So I have a soft ink here. This is soft granite from Hero Arts, and I'm inking up just the ice cream cone only. And I'm going to stamp at the top first, so that's my top scoop of ice cream. It's not stamped perfectly. That's okay. This next one actually is going to overlap with it, but that's okay too because we're going to cover this with the embossing paste. Now for the last one I'll do just the cone, or I'm sorry, just the ice cream scoop again, and then I'll just have the cone left to do. Now you'll notice that I kind of started too low, so this isn't actually going to be centered between the top and the bottom of the area here, but that's okay because we can trim this up later. I'm inking up just the cone with Versamark ink so that I could heat emboss the cone. So I'm going to line it up with my bottom scoop and stamp it, and I'm going to use some bronze embossing powder. I have my coffee filter ready to collect all the embossing powder that falls off here. I'm going to shake on the bronze embossing powder, tap off the extra. Now cleaning this is super easy. I can just kind of grab the coffee filter and put the remainder into the bottle and then just crumble that up and throw it away with no mess. I thought the texture of the heat embossed image would be great for that waffle cone, and we'll come back to more coloring on that in a moment. But let's go ahead and do our embossing paste ice cream cone. So we're going to actually color in the stamped image with colored embossing paste. This is really easy to do. You can actually color embossing paste with anything you want. You could use reinkers, you could use paint. I just decided to use ink because I have it on hand. Any kind of ink would work for this, dye or pigment. I'm using Hero Arts bubblegum ink here. This is a dye ink. I'm going to take a tiny little glop of embossing paste here. I love embossing paste. I prefer it much more over than modeling paste. I think embossing paste is much nicer and it's got a great texture. It's perfect for these ice cream cones. So I'm using a palette knife to just mix this up. You could use a scrap of paper if you want to. I'm going to scrape it all onto my knife here so that it's ready to go to paint. And you want to use this pretty quickly. You don't want to like go cook dinner and come back because it'll be hard as a rock. Or not really hard as a rock, but it'll be firm. So you don't want to let this set too long. Now I actually found the easiest way to paint in the stamped image is to put a pretty good sized glop of this. Glop is the word of the day, by the way. Pretty good sized glop of this in the center of your stamped image. Then use the brush to kind of push it up against the stamped edge, so right up and over the stamping outline. Now I'm using an old brush for this. You might want to get a brush, an inexpensive brush, and just kind of designate it for this technique because I'm not sure how well it'll clean up afterwards. I didn't have a problem, but I don't want you ruining any good brushes. I'm using a craft knife to kind of push it back in line and kind of form it to look like a scoop of an ice cream cone. And you'll notice I stopped right under the next scoop above it so that I didn't have to overlap my colors. You'll see it was really easy to do, and I'm just leaving all the uneven texture because it looks like an ice cream cone. So you'll see I'm quickly cleaning off my palette knife and my craft sheet work surface here and my paintbrush so I can move on to the next color. Now for the yellow scoop, I actually did 2 colors. I actually used the Simon Says Stamp sunshine color, which is really bright yellow, and I wanted to kind of tone it down, so I actually used a little bit of soft brown from Hero Arts too, so I end up with like a softer yellow. So I mixed that up with my palette knife. I'm going to take that same brush and scoop a pretty good sized glop right in the center and push it out. I think that's so much easier to do, and I go up and kind of over the outline image just so you don't see that gray outline. You could stamp with a softer ink, but I was afraid you wouldn't be able to see it in the video. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this entire scoop up to the line where the next scoop starts on top, and I'll use the craft knife to kind of form it around. Now you could save a lot of time here by only doing 1 scoop if you wanted to, but I thought it was fun to do the 3. This is going to be for my teenage daughter who loves ice cream. Now, another thing that you could use this colored embossing paste for to color in an image, you could do any kind of thing that you want texture on. I thought it'd be fun to stamp like a wreath and put little red berries of embossing paste. You could do all kinds of things. So even a flower would be fun to have some texture. You can kind of smooth it out if you wanted to. So here I have some mint colored ice cream here. I used a mint ink pad and it wasn't dark enough, so I actually put more ink down and mixed it even more so that I could get even darker embossing paste. So now I'm just going to go ahead and paint this in, and there we have our 3 ice cream cones. And I think it looks pretty realistic, and because this embossing paste dries kind of soft and it doesn't come off, it'll keep that nice texture when it goes to the mail. Now I have some Elizabeth Craft Designs glitter. I love this glitter. It's super fine. It's kind of like the glitter Ritz. And I'm just taking the clear glitter and just kind of flicking a little bit onto the ice cream cones. Now, if you don't press this in, it doesn't really stick that well to the embossing paste. So I'm gently, very gently with my finger kind of pushing some of this in. I don't want to completely cover the cones, just add a little sparkle here and there. So I just gently pushed it into the paste and I let that sit aside to dry for a bit. Now I decided to go ahead and watercolor in my cone. So I took some vintage photo distress marker and scribbled it on my craft sheet, added some water, and now I'm just painting it in. You can use any form of watercolor here. Take pretty much any marker, just not a permanent one, scribble it on your craft sheet, add some water, and you can watercolor with it. Or you can just use regular watercolor, or another means of coloring this in. And I wanted to have some darkness underneath the cone and off to the side, so I'm going back with even more color and adding some in there. The joy of watercolor is you don't need to spend much time with it, and see, it doesn't look all that great there, but when it dries it'll be perfect. So it's one of the great reasons to use watercolor. Now I wanted a little cherry on top, so I stamped the little cherry image from the stamp set with a light ink, and now I'm coloring over it with my Copics. I started here with R29, it's just a good red. I added some darkness underneath it with R33, and then I added a brown stem to the cherry, and then I'm kind of lightening up the top part of the cherry with an R02 just to give it a little dimension. Now this is crazy. I'm going to cut this little guy out, and I know many of you would scream to have to fussy cut this, but every once in a while I think it's worth fussy cutting something like this because it's just perfect on the top of this ice cream cone, and it didn't take all that long. You could die cut something or use a red gem with a little marker drawn stem if you wanted to. I'm using a brush over a coffee filter to just kind of knock away all that excess powder because now my ice cream cone has completely dried. And you'll see a little bit of sparkle is left behind, but not too much. I wish it captured in the video a little bit better, but there is a little bit of sparkle and shine to those little ice cream cones. It just adds a little bit of interest. If I had little beads, I thought it would be fun to put little beads on the top to be little sprinkles. Okay, so now I have my little cherry, and I'm holding it with tweezers. I squirted way too much multi-medium on the back of it, so I'm using my fingers to kind of just spread it out and take the excess off. And now I'm going to stick this onto my embossing paste. Now my embossing paste is pretty much dry, but you can see I can still kind of tuck that little cherry into the top scoop, and I'm just pushing it down with these tweezers. I love these tweezers because they clamp onto things, and you can also use the point to move things around. Okay, so now while that sits for a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and arrange my greeting. Now you'll see the greeting on here in the stamp set. It says, "I love you more than ice cream." That's a lot. Well, I don't really like ice cream all that much, but my teenage daughter is in love with it. So I'm going to completely change this greeting so it says, "I love you more than you love ice cream." That's a lot, and she'll get a kick out of this. So I'm going to cut my stamps. Don't worry, they're not screaming, I promise. And I can always mount these onto an acrylic block how they were intended to be. But by cutting this up, I can completely change that greeting and change how they're positioned so that it fits into this area here. Now what I'm going to do is start with the bottom sentiment, so I'm working my way up. So I'm going to just stamp "That's a lot" with a red pigment ink here. This is Mama Elephant ink, and I'm going to red heat emboss this. You could use Versamark ink here, but since I'm lining up all these greetings, I wanted you to be able to see all the stamping as I went, so that's why I used the colored inks. This is a red embossing powder from Ranger. It's a great red color. This embossing powder looks a little brighter in the powder form than it does when you heat emboss it, so it turns out to be just a great cherry red that matches the cherry on top of our ice cream cone. So after I heat set this, I'm going to go ahead and do the next line up in my greeting, and I'm going to stamp this with a gray ink. This is Avery Elle Fog ink. It's a great gray ink. You could use Versamark here. Again, I'm just using colored so you can see it as I stamp, and it actually helps because I'm going to stamp all of these lines above each other, and if it was in Versamark, I wouldn't see it, and I'd have to stop and heat emboss in between each layer of the greeting. Now this is where I performed a little surgery. Remember, the greeting said I love you at the beginning. I cut it up and just stamped you and love there so that I could have a completely different greeting. So it used to say I love you more than ice cream, that's a lot. I changed it to I love you more than you love ice cream, that's a lot. I love changing up greetings and getting more from them. This took a little bit of time, but it was definitely worth it because I think my daughter will get a kick out of it. So I put on some liquid platinum embossing powder. It's a great kind of warm silver color for the rest of the greeting, and I like that the "that's a lot" image kind of stands out with the red. Okay, so when I remove painter's tape, here's the trick. You kind of fold it back and pull it back against itself, and that's how you remove it without hurting the paper. I found that that works best for me. So now we have our ice cream cone and greeting centered on this piece of cardstock. It's a great trick to center small images in the center of a card. It's kind of block an area off with the painter's tape. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do that little red frame that's around the card. This is a die from Simon Says Stamp. It's a new one, and you can see the rest of the die set here over to the right. I'm just running it through my die cut machine with some red cardstock. I thought this little red frame would tie together with the greeting and with the cherry on the top of our ice cream. So this die cuts this super fine red frame. Now I think it would be really cool to inlay this into the card. If you've watched my videos, I like to do die cut inlaying. But I had already put all this embossing paste on here and I didn't want to squish it down. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue this around my card. So I'm just putting a little bit of multi-medium on the back of this with my finger. You don't need much, this stuff holds really well. And then I'll lay this right onto the center of my card. Now I'll start moving it around and make sure I get it in the right place. If some of that adhesive gets on that white cardstock where I don't want it, it's okay because it dries matte and you'll never see it. Now since this is pretty flimsy, I wanted to make sure that I kept it straight. So I'm just going to take that leftover piece, the scrap of the negative space of this, and use it as a guide to make sure that I get all those thin lines around the frame just nice and straight. So that just kind of helped me guide, and I'll take it off, and now we have the rectangle in place. Very easy to do. Now I also decided just to put this on the front of a white note card, but I trimmed down this watercolor piece. So I'm going to glue it up into the top corner of my card. So this is a top folding card. And then I'll just take my long scissors and trim off the excess from the side and the bottom. I was originally going to take this piece and have it on a red note card, but that was a little too much. And so I thought by gluing this on the front of the card without another layer, it just worked perfect. So that's why I have to trim all this extra off. Okay, so now I wanted to add a little bit of shine to the cherry, so I put some Wink of Stella shimmer on it. And then I'm going to put a coating of glossy accents on that so that I could make it nice and shiny. Now somebody recently emailed me and asked about how you keep your glossy accents from getting clogged. Here's the trick. You want to tap it on your table a few times so you get all the bubbles out. Then you want to kind of squirt into a baby wipe or a paper towel. Squirt any of it that's in the nozzle until only air comes out, and then tap it a few more times and you'll see the nozzle's completely clean, and then put the lid on and it'll never get clogged again. So there you have it, a fun way to use colored embossing paste to actually color in a stamped image, and also how you can take a greeting and completely change it up to get something new and different. If you're interested in the products I use, I always link them below in my YouTube description to several sources, and you can go over to my blog at jennifermcguireinc.com for much more information and a giveaway of this stamp set and the kit that it is from. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you'll stop back by again soon.